Begin chapter. The surgery date was fast approaching. The doctor expected Sheila to check in early and to be placed in a room where she could be monitored for a few days before he performed the surgery. Sheila felt uneasy, and she told me that she was unsure that she would make it through the surgery. I kept assuring her that the medical professionals were confident and that she would fare well. I, too, worried about the surgery and about her anxiety. Graduating from the University of Wyoming was a step in the right direction. It wasn't the degree that I had planned, but we had been broke college students that were getting more broke by the semester. This was a time before internet job searches, and I only knew of 2 jobs. This was mid-year, as far as the school year went. It was December of 1986. We had enrolled with the Job Placement Center at the College of Education, and I still remember my identification number, 022004. It is rather interesting how we carry around rather useless information like an outdated identification number or an old childhood phone number, and yet few remember the names of individuals they attended college classes with, or even the names of their childhood neighbors. Once the job placement account was activated, the staff would file job opportunities into folders of those seeking employment. These folders were color-coded. If, for example, the folder had a blue stripe on it, the science jobs were added to the folder. Yellow stripe may have meant history jobs, and so on. I would go to the center and ask for my folder. It would contain certain jobs that matched my certifications. The folders in the wintertime were very thin. The placement service also had a bulletin board for the most recent postings. In Wyoming, I was certified in physics, chemistry, and composite science. The Department of Education would not certify me in mathematics because I needed an algebra and a geometry. I had the college algebra. That likely would have counted if I pushed it. I took it summer of my junior year in high school, though Northwest Community College in Powell, but I didn't have the geometry. Yes, I had enough calculus credits for any type of undergraduate engineering degree, but I had never bothered to take a college geometry class. I had, however, taken a class called Descriptive Geometry. Descriptive Geometry was an architectural engineering course that was taken after the first year of drafting. Some colleges inserted a section of the descriptive geometry in their drafting courses, but at the University of Wyoming, it was taught as a standalone course. It was a rather tough course. It required both math skills and drafting skills. We were taught to calculate and predict where air shafts would be placed in mines, where to drill an exploratory well without hitting a fault line and losing circulation, and other three-dimensional problems. Because it apparently failed to cover things such as Pythagorean theorem, it wasn't deemed as an appropriate geometry for the Department of Education. They would not sign off on a math certification for me. My options at the time has not changed much in all these years. Some things in the educational system need to be seriously analyzed, and quite possibly an overhaul would be beneficial. One would think that if I could survive Calculus 1 and Calculus 2, multivariable calculus, and differential equations, that maybe I knew a little algebra and enough geometry to teach math. I am sure we all have similar angst. To add insult to injury, differential equations 1 and 2 show on a college transcript as applied math 1 and 2. It seems that no one in the public school human resources department remotely appreciates the rigor associated with having applied math on a college transcript. Many of them seem to think that it is merely an educational methods class in mathematics. I applied for the 2 jobs that best matched my credentials, one in Kansas and one in San Antonio. The school in Kansas apparently filled rapidly or didn't want me because they never responded. The school district in San Antonio responded and asked for an interview. Sheila and I flew to San Antonio in January 1987 to interview for that position. It was a mid-year opening of math and science. Math. You may wonder how I was eligible to teach math in Texas. It seems that the Texas Education Agency, although requiring a geometry class, was perfectly fine with descriptive geometry class. Who was I to question them when it came to certifications? I went to work for my first school district in late January 1987. In Texas, I am certified to teach physics, composite science, and mathematics. I taught physics and algebra. By Wyoming standards, the school was a large school, but by Texas standards, it was mid-sized, with about 1,300 students enrolled from 9th through 12th grade. I had a great principal, Jesse M., and he worked with me knowing that I was a bit out of my element. The school itself was less than pretty. It had bars on its small windows, a constant reminder that I'm not in Wyoming anymore. Basketball is a significant sport in Wyoming. In Texas, not so much. I foolishly referred to the school's gym as the practice gym. This was met by a rather curt response from the head basketball coach as he informed me that I was indeed standing in the school's only gym. The school was essentially a big square building in the neighborhood adjacent to a well-known Catholic university. It is one of the oldest universities in Texas and has a well-known law school. The entire university seems somewhat out of place, as it stands with its majestic architecture, surrounded by rather humble communities of rather small houses. It is not uncommon to see college students with expensive sports cars and luxury cars pulling into the university grounds. By contrast, the students attending the high school where I worked usually arrived by public transportation or walked to school. Many of the students worked to help their families and a few went on to college. The inner-city school had some issues, however, it was a tight-knit community. The community seemed like a landlocked island where success was measured in smaller strides than by their counterparts across the street. Many of the teachers at this school could be placed into two groups, the philanthropists and the grateful to work groups. I am using the term rather loosely, but the philanthropists were individuals who had a calling to teach, especially in the underserved area. It was as if God had purpose for them to touch children's hearts. In my opinion, they were among the super teachers of the educational world. They never seemed to grow weary, students loved them, and they truly loved their calling. Two individuals that I truly admired were math teacher and department lead Miss A and science teacher and department lead Miss G. Both could have easily chosen to work at any other school, but they chose to devote their careers and their hearts to those children. They made a lifelong impact on these kids. Then there were the other group of employees. They were either afraid to try and get another job, were unable to get another job, or were somehow related to an individual with a bigger size shoe and were employed whether they were qualified or not. It was pretty easy to spot these individuals, primarily because the students didn't respect them. Kids know. Interestingly, I seemed to find both groups at any place of employment in addition to the regular employees. It was not exclusive to this high school, but it may have just been more noticeable to me since this school is where I cut my teeth in the educational world. Sheila and I struggled to acclimate to city life. We rented an apartment within a few miles of the school, but much closer to the inner loop in San Antonio for easy access. Sadly, I was still a country boy tossed into the city. I wasn't one to be careful with basic safety measures. I was too trusting, and thankfully my wife had lived in a different environment. So she helped me keep in check by reminding me to lock the door, take the key out of the car, etc. To give an indication as to how unprepared I was for city life, we came home one afternoon, and I saw the apartment door open. Being raised in northern Wyoming, I simply said to Sheila, "I must have left the door open." She knew better, and she was leery of entering for fear that some unsavory characters might still be there. It wasn't until I dropped the keys on the counter that I fully understood her concerns. We had been robbed. Microwave, jewelry, treasures, and furniture were among our property that were taken, but the robbers were smart enough not to take my guns. I had never felt such rage. We had been violated, and all we were trying to do was make a start in life. To this day, I have had little or no compassion for a thief. The door had been opened with a pry bar, and so had my sense of security and faith in people. It took me a long time to rekindle the fire of faith in mankind. What soured me the most was that nobody claimed to have seen anything. The robbery occurred early in the afternoon, yet no gardener, no security guard, no retired neighbor saw nor heard a thing. It took me a very long time to get over that encroachment into our lives. I had made up my mind that the decision to move to Texas was one of my worst decisions ever. Little did I know that Providence had guided us to a place where we would need to be. After 6 months, we promptly moved out of the apartment and into a small house that we purchased just outside of San Antonio city limits. To this day, we have never lived in another apartment complex, and I hope and pray that I will never need to in the future. It is somewhat sad to think that one sour event or one terrible mishap can change a person's perspective for nearly a lifetime. Unbeknownst to us, San Antonio was city rich in medical specialists and well-trained doctors. Also unbeknownst to us was the fact that we would be taking advantage of many of those specialists within the next few years. I taught for 2 years at this high school, but because of the move, we now lived miles from the high school, and the commute through traffic was wearisome. We had moved to an area which was somewhat at the outer edge of the neighboring school district, so I applied and was hired to teach physics at a much larger high school within this new district. It was a school built when architecture and education were going through a transition. It was a potpourri of strange-shaped buildings with even stranger-shaped classrooms. At the time, it consisted of 5 round buildings and 1 rectangular-shaped industrial arts building. When it was built, I am certain that it was an architectural marvel, but the open and glass-walled rooms, hallways going in circles, and the 7-sided rooms took some getting used to. I taught in Building B downstairs along the other science teachers. Upstairs was a glassed-in library that occupied the core of the building. It was rather pretty and a unique-looking library. Along any radius from the center to the brick outer wall was library space, round hallways, and small rooms with glass facing both the hallway and the outside world. This school was built on a hill, and at the time some of the land to the south was yet to be developed. It was, and still is, a pretty campus, but at the time that it was built it must have been magnificent. Some of these rooms had a view that would have easily distracted me had I been a student here. Actually, the view did distract me several times as a teacher. It was an amazing experience to watch a storm rumbling in through the south while standing on the second-story sidewalk that circled the building. The view was wonderful, amazing, and sometimes ominous. Since the time that I taught here, a plethora of buildings, businesses, and apartments have cluttered the view. The tobacco-chewing, cowboy-boot-wearing principal was charming, funny, and well-loved by faculty and students alike. He was a maverick as far as administrators went, appearing out of place at first glance, but he was obviously oh so at home with his campus when the initial glance was replaced with the full picture. I think he liked the idea that we were from Wyoming. I also think he liked the idea that I had a different approach to physics. The approach was not necessarily better, just a bit different. I am very abstract random, and that seems to provide a haven for those kiddos that other teachers would consider to be knuckleheads. The students were eager to learn and quite capable of thinking outside the box, and teaching became fun.